have people to talk to, we have phone calls to make, and we have an election to win. So are you ready to get to work? Do we believe in freedom? Do we believe in opportunity? Do we believe in the promise of America? And are we willing to fight for it? And when we fight, we win. God bless you all, and God bless the United States of America and Joe Biden.
That was the first speech given by Vice President Kamala Harris since President Joe Biden stepped off the ticket. It's also the first time we have heard from President Joe Biden himself. It is a stump speech similar to the one she's been given, with all of the bells and whistles of a fully functioning campaign. She made some news there. Actually, let me deal with the love first. One of the most emotional moments there was when President Joe Biden came on and addressed his campaign staff. He said about his decision to leave the race, quote, "It was the right thing to do," but he thanked this campaign staff. Campaign staff doesn't always get a shout out, but from President Joe Biden, they did. He said, quote, "You've poured your heart and soul into my campaign. So many of you have uprooted your lives for me. We built the best campaign in history with 2,000 paid staff, thousands of volunteers." And then he literally and figuratively turned it over to this new ticket. Vice President Harris was introduced by her husband, who had some of the most emotional grace notes toward the president and First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden. Doug Emhoff saying, quote, "I was emotional listening to the president, the dignity and empathy of this man." And then he told a story about what the president said to him when he first moved to Washington. President Joe Biden saying to Doug, quote, "I know, kid, you were a great lawyer." It was an introduction of his wife. Again, this was Vice President Kamala Harris's first speech as the presumptive Democratic nominee. And again, the love and affection that she has for President Joe Biden, the way serving as his vice president has shaped her as a leader and as a candidate. Impossible to ignore. Listening along with us and watching along with us this history in the making. Our friends Maya Wiley is still here, Tim Miller still here, joining our coverage, the host of Politics Nation here on MSNBC, the president of the National Action Network, the Reverend Al Sharpton. Rev, your thoughts?
I thought it was very heartwarming to hear from Joe Biden.
Yeah.
And I also thought that it showed a lot of the real fire and energy in Vice President Harris, because her speech, it was not only what she said, but her delivery that was, to me, so reassuring to the American people that were watching and to that staff there. She called me last night, and I sensed that she's very comfortable in her own skin as a candidate now. And I think Donald Trump is certainly going to have a real fight on his hand. She took him on categorically, went down on the things that he had been found guilty of, and that she's prosecuted people like that. This is not what Donald Trump thought he was going to have to deal with in a campaign. I thought it was a very good outing for her and for President Biden.
This was the line. This was the setup, Tim Miller. She went through her own biography, something she's going to have to do for the voters that maybe haven't paid as close of attention to politics as we all have. But she explained how she was a prosecutor and she took on perpetrators of all kinds, she said, predators, fraudsters, and cheaters. And then she said this, quote, "I know Donald Trump's type." Wow.
Yeah, Nicole, bear with me. I'm jumping out of my seat over here watching this. I just think people have been thirsting for this. People have been thirsting for this in two ways. I just want to focus on the back half of her speech that she gave, contrasting Donald Trump and talking about the future. In two ways, people have been thirsting for somebody to stand up to this bully, and to make a compelling argument for why we will not accept somebody that is a felon, that is a fraudster, that is somebody that commits sexual assault. She knows how to stand up to those people because she did it, and she delivered a compelling message that I think will resonate with people and that will galvanize Democratic supporters to her side, to knock on doors, to donate. I thought that part of the message was extremely important. But the thing I think people have really been thirsty for and just desperate for was someone at the top of one of these tickets that can talk about the future. And that was just the problem with having an 81-year-old against a 78-year-old, and a 78-year-old who's a megalomaniac that only cares about himself. There was nobody really articulately messaging about what our country is and what it could be. And I thought that part at the end of her speech, looking forward, to who we are as a country, how we can make this a better country. I think that there's a lot of people out there that are ready for it, that have been made cynical by politics of the Trump era. And I was extremely encouraged by what we heard from her right there.
Maya, before we went into this event, and I'm so happy that we got there in time to hear President Joe Biden's voice, that, again, the first time anyone has heard from him publicly since the history he made about 27 hours ago to step off the ticket. The love between President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris is so evident, and the gratitude. I mean, I've worked on campaigns, and I was fortunate to always feel appreciated by the candidates, but that is not what you always experience. The gratitude and the love that this president has for his campaign staff and the affection that is very, very evident between President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris is in and of itself this startling, vivid contrast between the Democrats and the Republicans.
Yeah, and I know this is something Rev Sharpton and I have experienced together, actually being in the White House, either with the president or with the vice president. This is who they are. These aren't people who just show up for the public to put on a show. This is what you see behind closed doors. This is not just graciousness for political expediency. This is graciousness because grace is something that matters deeply to these two leaders. And I was tearing up when Kamala started talking about Beau and that introduction for her to her relationship with President Biden, knowing what that means to him, knowing what that means to her. Those are intimate moments that actually give everyone in the public sphere the opportunity to see who these people are as people. And they're both exceptionally loving people. And I'll just say this, and I'm with Tim. I'm jumping out of my seat higher than you, my brother. I'm just going to say that because, you were starting to ask me before we broke rightly to this speech about the attacks on Kamala Harris that are personal and wrong and ugly and actually the measure of the person who levels them. But let's just go back to the fact that this human being, this leader, this experienced person that we just heard from that is calling us to be a we and not an us and a them, is also the person who is joyful, who is showing up with her full self. And by the way, has already demonstrated that she is the one that is not going to be afraid to call them out, even when a Sebastian Gorka, a right hand to President Trump, tries to disparage her by calling her a woman, tries to disparage her by calling her colored. That is a proof point to her very point, which is that what we're facing is a question about what is our future. And that is exactly what we want to see as voters in terms of who's going to show up and represent us. And I think that she has just demonstrated how she is going to run and how well she's going to run.
I mean, Rev, I've said this so many times over the last 3 weeks. I have benefited enormously to have had many of her events take place on my air in my time slot. I also covered her very closely in 2020, and I have always been incredibly impressed with her as a candidate. But I think what Maya's getting at is this capacity to do what all of us strive to do in our personal life, sort of evolve and love out loud. I mean, let me just share the story she told about Beau Biden, and I wrote it down as quickly as I could. She talked about first getting to know President Biden through his son, Beau, and she said, these were the things that I knew through Beau. He revered his father's honesty and integrity and commitment to the truth. I am a firsthand witness of seeing basically all those things in motion on the world stage and his fight for the American people. Her ability to weave the personal through the professional, through the mission, is, in my view, singular at this moment in terms of public people on the sort of public stage and in the arena. It is a special, special gift.
It is a very special gift, and it is sincere. I remember just week before last, I was with Vice President Harris at the Essence Festival in New Orleans, and we spent some time backstage, and she was saying then, Reverend Al, you got to stick with the president. You can't get out there and try to say he should move to the side. She was defending why he should stay in when many people were saying he should get out and make way for her. And she advocated for him out of a genuine sense of he's a good man. And she went through down categorically. You came, meaning Big Me, in terms of civil rights leadership, with certain things. He did this, he did this, he did that. We should give him his dignity and let him go ahead and run his race. And she was with him until he said that he was not going to run. That's the kind of person she is, but as Maya Wiley said, that's the kind of relationship they had. If you're sitting in the Roosevelt Room or the Oval Office meeting with the two of them, you could tell there was a genuine warmth and regard for them. And to see that contrasted with this guy that has a Fifth Avenue penthouse with another guy writing a book about hillbillies that are going to try to replace this in the Oval Office is frankly frightening to me.
There's the Mike Pence of it too, Tim Miller. I mean, these two, and again, whatever you think of Democratic policies, that's fine. That's over here. But these are two human beings who ran together and governed together during COVID. This epic loss of life, period of absolute terror, unprecedented isolation in American life and politics. They governed together. They formed bonds. Their spouses clearly formed bonds. Donald Trump is running with J.D. Vance because he left his last vice president for dead, literally. He sent his supporters to, quote, hang Mike Pence. So the idea of Vice President Kamala Harris at the convention, taking the stage with whomever she selects as her vice president, and Joe and Jill Biden being there as well. I mean, unity gets overdone and overwrought, but this unified mission of saving democracy has so many people showing that that's their commitment, in addition to saying and articulating the contrast. What do you make of sort of this coalescing on the left?
Yeah, well, look, our cup overfloweth with contrast options now, as you mentioned, JD and Trump and how everybody's behaved. So I will have plenty of times to talk about that. But yeah, look, I think from a character standpoint, how deftly she managed and loyally she managed an extremely tough situation. I would also point out, I guess Reverend Al can vouch based on a personal conversation. I just read the newspaper, and you can. I've been on a lot of campaigns. You can imagine a lot of situations where that's turned out differently, where there were people around the vice president herself, her family, angling, leaking. And there just wasn't any of that. There was a loyalty, there was a commitment to the person that brung her and chose her to be the vice president. And as we've been saying, meanwhile, also going out there and doing the campaigning and doing it in a compelling way to demonstrate, that she was ready for this fight. So when you just think about that and compare it to literally Donald Trump sitting around eating hamburgers off of the Oval Office while a mob of people that he sent charge the Capitol to attempt to kill his vice president. And the fact that his vice president wasn't even there last week on the convention stage, and they had to replace him with, this guy who's out there at his campaign event today. Talk about a split screen with that Vice President Harris. J.D. Vance is out at his campaign event today, talking about how, like, people call me racist because I drink Diet Mountain Dew, and having somebody talking about Civil War speaking before him. I mean, you couldn't get a more dramatic split screen between kind of that vice presidential relationship with their president through tough times. And I think it says a lot about Kamala Harris's character. And it certainly says a lot about Donald Trump's lack of it.
All right, Maya Wiley and Tim Miller, who both stayed overtime to watch that speech with us. Thank you both so much for doing that. Joining our conversation, the host of the Fast Politics podcast and special correspondent for Vanity Fair, Molly John Fast, is here. Also joining us, the host of the On Brand podcast, Donnie Deutsch, is here. Donnie, your thoughts on all of it?
Wow. There was a twinkle in her eye. There was a kick in her step that, when you're vice president, you're not loose. You can't, there's somebody above you. There's somebody, you don't want to overshadow them. And this was quite the coming out. And I got chills when she said, Donald Trump, I know your type. That was like, well, she's going to prosecute this case. And, this is going to, she only mentioned the abortion issue, not, wasn't a big part of the speech. But this is going to be, and I said this before on the show before, women are going to save this country. And we have a choice between an assault on women, an assault on their bodies and their freedoms, and the first female president. And I think women are going to drive the ship. And I was blown away. I kind of fell in love with her. I thought she was smart, engaging. She's funny, feisty, twinkle in your eye, punch you in the gut. I mean, everything you kind of want. And I just thought it was a great, great opening act.